Well, here we are. It's the end of this Shmita cycle that began in the spring of 2015. You know, we think differently about time around here. A lot of folks probably feel, hey, it's April. We're way past 2015. But actually, 2015, the Hebrew year, that is, that began in 2015, has been a very unusual year. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. We want to take a look at this Hebrew year that began in 2015 and notice turning points and see if we can get some perspective. You know, we started talking about 2015 quite a long time ago. As a matter of fact, in the last Shmita year, which is 2008, we talked about some things that have to do with 2015. And we've been talking about some of those things since then. And one of the big things has been the tetrad moons, the blood red eclipses that occurred in 2014 and 2015. These got noticed just about 7 years ago from the NASA website. And very soon people started speculating what this could mean. And some people thought it meant that the rapture would happen in 2015. And some people thought it meant the return of Christ would happen in 2015. So when I was seeing that, I felt I needed to write about that. And I didn't believe it had anything to do with any of those things. I have a video about it that explains all about it. But basically what I was saying is this has to do with Israel. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. Well, all Shmita years are important because they tend to be turning points. This that you're looking at right here is a chart from my presentation a year ago when we dedicated our building here right around Passover time. And you might remember I went through these various Shmita years and we looked at how each of them was a turning point that set up a situation of events that happened thereafter. We left off 2015, which was just before us. Now we're in a situation where we have hindsight. We can look back and say, have there really been turning points? Did this Shmita year fit the same pattern of a year that had lots of turning points? You know, for a lot of people, when they look back on 2015, all they see is a mass of confusing events. It seemed like kind of a crazy year with so many of the different things that happened. But as we look at this tonight, I think we're going to find a common thread, and we are going to find turning points. I've listed 7 turning points. Now, there arguably are more, but I've narrowed it down to 7. For example, things having to do with the economy. I just left that off the list, but there have been important things having to do with the economy. There's been a number of things that are not on the list that I think are important, some technological advances as well. But we're going to stick with this list, 7 items. Turning points. Now that's a lot of turning points in one year. And we're going to take a look at them one by one here. But here's what we're going to find as we go through this. This is the common thread with these turning points, is that all of these turning points are related to the globalist agenda. And really, if there is a theme to 2015, it's the rise of the globalist agenda. Now, let's take a look at that and see if we can understand why that is so. Here we have a slide from a video that I did. I think it was around 2013. And this shows the tetrad moons. I was the only one really to point out about these Star of David planetary alignments. There were 13 of them leading up to the tetrad moons, which certainly showed that this has something to do with Israel. Also, you'll see on my chart here, I have a little question mark. Is this the Psalm 83 war? That's what I believed. I believed that these tetrad moons pointed and point to a war having to do with Israel. And I believe that because the other tetrad moons had to do with wars with Israel. Let's take a closer look at that question now. On our list, we have the top 3 items that are related to this. The nuclear deal with Iran, the Sunni-Shia Mideast war, and the refugee crisis and the terrorism that goes along with it. And I've kind of put those together. Now, this is such a big subject, I'm going to address this in greater detail in an upcoming message. So I'm not going to go into this real deeply, except I do want to take a look at this and show how this has to do with the globalist agenda. So that's what I'm looking at with this tonight. Pardon me that we have kind of a graphic image here, even though it is just a cartoon. But I don't think it's anywhere near as graphic as what has actually been happening in the Middle East, which is pretty horrible. Basically, what we have seen is a Sunni Shiite war. Now, from the West, in the news, that really gets played down. So a lot of us don't really understand that what is actually happening in the Middle East is a sectarian war in Islam, within Islam. But over there, they know that. And Israel knows that. And you will find more about that actually in looking in sources from that part of the world. And really, in 2015, this reached a new height where the fighting was so bad and so much was at stake that the Sunnis put together a coalition of 150,000 to 350,000, according to different estimates, from 20 different Sunni countries, and brought their armies together in the northern part of Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia pulled this coalition together. They were leading this. And that's quite an amazing thing because you really don't see that kind of cooperation, frankly, among countries in that part of the world. And this really could have escalated not only into a much worse conflict than was already going on there, but according to Putin of Russia, he was looking at World War III. And after this happened, he withdrew, which I think shows you exactly how bad this is in the Middle East, where, yes, Putin's still in the country, but he withdrew his troops he withdrew into a corner of the country, basically, where they could protect themselves. And this sets up a situation now where I think what we're looking at from this point is a tremendous escalation of war. Well, as I looked at this and I read over Psalm 83, I realized that perhaps as we look at the situation on the ground, as things have actually unfolded with the millions of people, literally millions of people that have been displaced from their homes, and hundreds of thousands of people that have been killed already in this sectarian war, that perhaps Psalm 83 might be coming about in a way that's a little different than what we might have thought. And you know, this often happens with the scriptures because they don't always tell us everything. Sometimes we have to wait till things actually happen to understand the fullness of those things. So, you know, we might have thought about the Psalm 83 war that it's going to be bing, bang, boom, and it's all over overnight. However, look at these verses from Psalm 83. It says, "Fill their faces with confusion, that they may seek your name, Yahweh. Let them be disappointed and dismayed continually. Yes, let them be confounded and perish." Now, that doesn't sound like something that's going to happen in a few days. It's using language, this, for instance, dismayed continually. In Hebrew, it's actually referring to an extended length of time. And look at the purpose, the confusion, the disappointment, being dismayed. It's that they may seek his name. And again, I think this points to a more extended kind of war. And it's definitely talking about a war between the enemies of Israel. And it's a more extended kind of war. And I believe it may very well be this Sunni and Shiite war that has greatly escalated in this Shmita year. And we'll have to look and watch on this and see how this develops now as time goes by. But definitely things in the Middle East reached a turning point in 2015. Well, how did this happen? The globalist elite launched the Arab Spring to deliberately destabilize the Middle East. Now, I've had radio programs and On the Road to Zion back as early as 2011 that document all this, that speak about all this. There were meetings in New York City and other places where representatives of the elite, the banks, the World Bank, the Rand Corporation, and politicians like Hillary Clinton and others, people from the State Department, and a whole range of other globalists got together experts, and they brought primarily college students from these Middle East countries. And they trained them how to actually cause an insurgency in their countries. And they had representatives there from some of the big firms that you'd be very familiar with on the internet to teach them how to use Facebook and Twitter and Google in order to create this movement. So this was sold to us in the press as being a grassroots movement, people wanting freedom and so on. But actually, the entire thing was cooked up by the globalists. And Then, what happened down the line from that? After they started all of this, then they withdrew from Iraq, and they left a power vacuum in Iraq. This is after they already had funded and trained so-called moderate Islamic forces. Some of these were what we know of now as the Islamic State. And they quickly acted to fill the vacuum as America withdrew from Iraq. And I think you remember in 2014 how it happened, how they quickly took over large parts of Iraq and Syria, and how they continue there now, dominating these areas and all that happened there. All of this is actually a part of this Sunni-Shiite war, but it's instigated by the globalists. And you know, as you look at what has happened in the Middle East, what I hear people saying, even some of the presidential candidates say, well, they just don't know what they're doing, because obviously that's the wrong thing to do. But they do know what they're doing, and they're doing it on purpose. They wanted to destabilize the Middle East. And to further destabilize the Middle East, what they did was make a deal with Iran over nukes. And this was against the better judgment of Israel, who really opposed that move, as well as allies in the region, I should say especially Sunni allies such as Saudi Arabia and other countries. This was pushed through despite all of them. And instead of keeping the Iranians from getting nukes, the plan actually, according to Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, is a plan that leads directly to nukes in the Middle East. And this is like just pouring gasoline on the flames of the Middle East. And this is why the whole thing after that has flared up, because the Sunnis, who are closely related or have been closely related to the Western Bloc, including the United States, felt that they had been betrayed and decided to go their own way and pursue their own national interests. And this involved then this war with the Shiites that has been going on since then. So why did the globalists do this? Why would they create all of this instability? Why would they push it further with the nuclear deal? Why would they leave that vacuum in Iraq for ISIS to fill? Well, all of this was to create conditions that encouraged the Islamic factions to kill off and weaken one another. And eventually, when they're done fighting with each other, then, of course, they'll go after Israel. And the reason why the globalists want to do this is, of course, the Islamic nations, which represent about a quarter of the Earth's population, have their own agenda of world domination. And they represent a block of nations that potentially would stand in the way of the globalist government. And so before we get to that point, they want to weaken this block of nations so that they cannot in any way stand in the way of the globalist New World Order. So it actually serves their interests. This is how they see it in what they're doing. So this is the plan, and they pushed this forward a lot. This really represents a turning point. Never before have we had a situation where the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States were at total loggerheads with each other, actually like enemies with one another, actually lobbying against each other on the world stage. It's just an amazing thing to see, and it really all does represent a turning point in the Middle East. Now, in the short run, this actually is a good thing for Israel, because while their enemies are all fighting with each other, then they're using up all their energy and resources on that rather than fighting with Israel. And this may be what happens over time. However, in Israel, they believe that eventually they will face a major war farther down the line in this process. And that probably is what will happen. But anyway, as you look at it from that perspective, you can see how this has to do with the global elite, and this is planned out by them. It's not just that they're ignorant and don't know what they're doing. It's not just that they don't know how to make a deal with Iran. It's all on purpose. Well, we want to take a look at the refugee crisis and terrorism on its own, because there's more to be said about that. Here we have Ban Ki-moon praising Merkel of Germany for her moral leadership on the migrant crisis. Basically, her stance was tear down the borders. Let all these migrants just come through because it's a matter of an emergency, a humanitarian situation. And she was doing what the United Nations said to do. The UN chief also used this as an opportunity to speak against what he called extreme right-wing and nationalistic political parties. And I'm sure we've watched and seen what has happened in Europe with this migrant crisis. It turns out that this also is all totally engineered by the globalists. This was part of their plan in destabilizing the Middle East. They knew all these people would have to go somewhere, and where were they going to go? They're going to go to the most developed countries, aren't they? That would be mostly to Europe, but hundreds of thousands even here to America. And here we have George Soros. And he's a well-known globalist billionaire. And he admits involvement in the migrant crisis, saying national borders are the obstacle. The only problem is if you don't have national borders, you don't have a country. And so I think it's obvious when you look at this to see how this benefits the globalists to have this happen. Well, it wasn't long after all of that that we had this situation. Cameron of the UK said that the Islamic State extremists threaten all of Europe. So this is where things are now, that the migrant crisis has led to a terrorist crisis, because simply letting all those people through, many of them no doubt good people, but some of them being terrorists and really not doing enough to know the difference between who's who. They allowed all of these terrorists into Europe. Nobody really knows where they are. And of course, there are huge Muslim communities in Europe, in all the countries of Europe. And they don't tell anybody. You know, they know who the terrorists are in their midst. They know who the extremists are. They don't tell anyone. And so these people can easily hide in those groups. So this has come to a turning point in Europe because of this migrant crisis. Terrorism is at a turning point. And just recently, articles have been coming out saying that ISIS is on the verge of nukes, starting with dirty nukes. So we can expect a real escalation of terrorism. Well, what possible reason could there be for globalists to promote terrorism? Well, why not ask the globalists? This is the Globalist magazine, and on their website they have the question: in what way did the attacks, that is terrorist attacks, enhance global integration? And here's the answer that they put forward. The formation of a global coalition against terrorism means that we are now moving beyond the globalization of the economy to the globalization of politics. So, by having this international problem of terrorism, it forces the individual nations to coalesce into more of a globalist network to fight terrorism. This moves everybody closer to the one world government. So terrorism works for them. So just to reiterate some of this, the globalists have engineered the destabilization of the Middle East and fostered the Sunni Shiite war to flood the West with Islamic refugees, with radicalized terrorists among them. Islamists, for the most part, do not assimilate into Western culture. A small percentage of them are terrorists, while the rest provide a haven for the terrorists in their midst, and also spread the ideology within the communities that promote terrorism. Here's their goals, the globalist goals. The flood of Islamic migrants breaks down national borders. This undermines nation states and works towards globalism, because a country without borders is not a country at all. By peppering the West with migrant Islamic communities, the globalists ensure a constant string of terrorist incidents in multiple countries. The effect is to cause the world to seek a global solution to the problem. Can't you see that? Already, how sick are we of this? And not just terrorism, but so many things that are global problems, all created by the globalists. But can't you see, as the years go by, things keep getting worse and worse and worse, that eventually the people will actually cry out for a global solution to all these problems, to have peace? That's really what it's all about. It's order out of chaos. Well, we're going to leave all of these things that originate in the Middle East now till the next time that I come back to those things, and look at another very significant turning point in 2015. And that is the United States Supreme Court decision on gay marriage. Here's one of the headlines at the time. This was actually June 26th that the ruling was handed down. And it states, Supreme Court rules in favor of same-sex marriage nationwide. This is actually quite an amazing thing to happen in America, because America has been seen as the center of Christianity in the world. And never in the history of the world has anything existed called same-sex marriage. Marriage has always been seen as something having to do with a man and a woman, not two people of the same sex. Certainly, the Bible defines marriage as something that has to do with a man and a woman, as we find the first marriage in the Garden of Eden between Adam and Eve, right? And what this really takes then to have same-sex marriage is to redefine a word that has had a certain meaning for literally thousands of years and give it a brand new meaning. And that's rather breathtaking. Is that a turning point or not? You know, that is a huge turning point in many ways. And this ruling was not unanimous. It was a 5-4 ruling, and the other justices each wrote their own dissenting opinion, each in very dire terms. Well, it didn't take long after this ruling for persecution of Bible believers to start. Here we have a headline. It begins, liberals and LGBT activists set their sights on Christian churches in call to remove tax-exempt status. Friends, that is coming, along with a lot of other things that are going to be meant to destroy freedom of speech, where even if you quote the scriptures rather than give your own opinion, that will be considered hate speech. That is coming down the line. This is going to continue to grow as time goes by. Along with this LGBT attack, we've also had other persecution going on in the world. Here's the Whistleblower magazine from 2015, and the name of it is Persecution Rising. The magazine points out that abuse of believers is only going to worsen around the world, and it states that Islam spawns the biggest spike in violence against believers on record. 2015 was a bloody year against believers in the scriptures, especially in the Middle East. Whole communities of Christians in the Middle East that had been there in some cases for many centuries, some over 1,000 years, have now abandoned their churches, abandoned their place, and fled for their lives. It's been an amazing situation. You know, in 2008, when we taught about the pale horse rider and this coming violence that would happen in the Middle East, we invited people to pray with us for the believers in the Middle East, for them to leave the area, that Yahweh would cause them to leave the area so that their lives could be spared. And I have to tell you the truth, at the time I didn't know that the way that would have to happen would be through widespread persecution. But really, if you think about it, that, of course, that's how it would happen. And that is how it has happened. And so even though many have lost their lives, many more have had their lives saved among the believers because they have been driven out of these areas. So it has been a time of tremendous persecution. And as the magazine pointed out, it's only going to get worse as time goes by. Before the ruling even came out, I produced the video saying what would happen when the ruling would come out, because I knew it was going to happen. It's a globalist thing. And we produced this DVD set that includes that material and more, called War on the Saints. And in this DVD set, I explain that what we actually have seen happen is the fifth seal has been removed, persecution of the believers, and that this is just going to keep intensifying. And really, we certainly have been seeing that happen, and we'll see it happen more and more as time goes by. Also, in those DVDs, We quote from the dissenting justices. These are learned judges who understand the Constitution of the United States, who understand the law. All of them say that this is not constitutional. They said not only is there no basis for it in the Constitution, another said that it's at odds with the Constitution, another said it's a threat to America, and it's at odds with the principles upon which the nation is based. And in fact, one said, the decision will vilify Americans unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy. They will risk being labeled as bigots. Is this a turning point in America? This is huge. This is a gigantic turning point. And does it have to do with war? You bet it does. It's war against all believers in the Scriptures. Here's the globalist goal. LGBT human rights form the perfect weapon in the hands of the globalists to destroy the natural enemy of world government, Bible believers. Any person who takes Scripture seriously over time will be scorned, marginalized, and persecuted. Churches will face loss of tax exemption and favor generally if they do not take up the progressive LGBT stance. Many have fallen in line already. Most will have caved into the globalist faith in a matter of a few short years. Those who do not will be dealt with harshly. The fifth seal has been opened, and persecution of believers will continue to intensify unto the end. You can see why they have to set aside the biblical standard of morality, because that's an obstacle to the globalist program. They must discredit the Bible, and the people, the masses of people that defend the Bible, of really all different denominations. They have to discredit them, they have to minimize them, and they have to persecute them to shut them up. And this is now underway. Well, here's another turning point of 2015. Isn't it amazing how many there are? All huge things. Papal support of the UN agenda. Nobody has ever seen this level of support by the Vatican for the United Nations. It's absolutely amazing. Pope Francis, the Pope of 1.2 billion Catholics. He's been saying things that even make some of the Catholics angry. Evolution and the Big Bang are true, he has said. He said that God is not a magician with a magic wand. He said about homosexuality, who am I to judge? He preaches compassion to the poor, which is good, and signaling the church to quit its focus on abortion, gay marriage, and the use of contraceptives. So obviously, he has moved far to the left in order to promote the socialist globalist agenda. You might remember when he came to the United States and all the fanfare that went with that. Meeting with the president, speaking to Congress, all lobbying for the agreement that was going to be ratified at the United Nations. And he followed all that up by addressing the United Nations and basically putting his stamp on Agenda 2030, urging world leaders to ratify that document, and there, in effect, to ratify the roadmap to the one world government. Gigantic. As we look at this, it is amazing. How many times have you seen a pope that actually wrote an encyclical, which is supposed to be a spiritual document, about climate change? But he did, pushing this 2030 agenda. And he presented it as a spiritual doctrine and as a moral necessity. He addressed the UN General Assembly in order to urge them all to ratify that. And I think the globalist goals in this are obvious: to use the Pope and his religious influence to convince over 1 billion Catholics and as many in the rest of the world as possible, and especially of those world leaders, to get on board with the UN plan. And at the same time, this would establish the Pope as the world's top religious leader, paving the way for the globalist one world religion. So this has been a huge turning point that happened in 2015. Well, all of that was to get us here. The ratification of UN Agenda 2030. Let's talk about that. Here is Ban Ki-moon of the United Nations with Pope Francis doing photo ops as they promote Agenda 2030. This is from the United Nations website. And they said all countries and all stakeholders acting in collaboration partnership will implement this plan. Amazingly, all the countries of the world have signed on to this plan. And when you read it, what you see is it has to do with managing literally everything on the planet. And it's clearly a global government. Never before have world leaders pledged common action and endeavor across such a broad and universal policy agenda. Universal is a one world government. Well, we didn't only get this from the UN. Here's from the United States mission to the UN, from their website. It says the world has finally agreed on an ambitious and transformative 2030 agenda for sustainable development, the first global development agenda to be fully negotiated by member states. And they also say the new agenda is universal and applicable to every country. So this is obviously a roadmap to the one world government, which we could expect from the name of this, Agenda 2030, to take place by that time. Well, isn't it great? You know, as you read through this, it's talking about doing away with poverty and hunger and accomplishing all these great things for people. And that has fooled a lot of people. But people who have actually been involved in the UN, who actually want to do good, give us a different picture. They say the UN plan to save the earth is a fig leaf for big business. That's what the UN insiders say. For instance, one of them says the process is a sham. They will co-opt our engagement and say they've consulted with us. All of the civil society groups that have tried to reform have been co-opted by the UN. You see, what they're going to do on a global scale is what every country is doing right now, what the United States is doing. Why is it that we have so many things, for example, in the United States, that the government is doing that's contrary to what the people want? It's because all of our rulers are being paid off by the global elite, right? So they're doing what they want instead of what the people need. So why would we expect at the UN, when there's a one world government, that government is going to do anything any different? Why would we think they're just going to be out to help the people when there's a lot of money to be made by doing what the elites want to have done? So this is the real plan. In fact, this is what is actually really going on already in the UN. And people are fooled by it. Many people are fooled by it. But it is a sinister, evil thing that is happening. And when you see a den of criminals like that getting together to benefit themselves at the expense of the world population, what would you expect that to become? Do you think that's going to become something righteous and good for the world? Interestingly, this seal appears in some of the United Nations literature representing the UN. This is an occult seal. The pyramid, very similar to the pyramid on your dollar bill, but now the top is on it. You notice that? With a big star there. 7 stars in all, which I believe picture the 70 world rulers in the heavenly places. And you notice how the pyramid is over the crown of the king? What is that telling you? Who's in charge here? I think the seal tells you a lot. In fact, I think it tells you pretty much what Revelation 17 tells you. Authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation was given to the beast. This is where these turning points must lead. As a matter of fact, before they even had their meeting for Agenda 2030, we had already started at Sukkot to present the Beasts of Daniel Surfacing Seminar live from our website. We've recorded it. Anyone can join our website as a member, and they can see it free of charge. We also have it on DVDs. It has some other bonus material with it that people can have it on their own shelf at home to be able to watch on their TV. But this is a very important presentation because it looks at these events that have happened in 2015, and it shows how they relate to the book of Daniel. It helps to give us our own roadmap for what's ahead of us. And if you haven't seen this yet, if you haven't watched the whole thing yet, please either go to our website and see it or get our DVDs and see it, because it has information that is absolutely vital for you to know about at the earliest opportunity. Ratification of UN Agenda 2030. It's not hard to figure out how this is related to the globalist agenda, is it? Agenda 2030, which is a roadmap to world government, was ratified by every country in the world. Now, how strange is that? That means countries that are literally at each other's throat, that disagree on everything, have all signed on to this. How much coercion do you think there must have been to make that happen? How much paying people off? How much arm twisting? An amazing thing that all the nations of the world have actually signed this document. And of course, the goal is to bring in the one world government by 2030. Now, a lot of people will scoff at that and say, well, that can't happen. But according to the scriptures, not only can it happen, but it must happen. And it will happen. And we are on the road to that right now. Well, now we get to my last point on here, and you might be a little surprised by this one, the Donald Trump revolt. And I really have more in mind than just Donald Trump here. I think Donald Trump represents a resistance to the globalist agenda. I think there have been and there will be many more individual representatives of this resistance in America and in other parts of the world, people who feel that this is the wrong direction to go and want to turn it around. Some of them will know that it's the globalists that are behind it. Some of them will just think it's because people were foolish or didn't know what they're doing or it's a mistake or something like that. But wherever they stand, they represent resistance to the one world agenda. Newt Gingrich summed it up. Now, Newt Gingrich was a Speaker of the House at one time in America. He knows all the establishment people, and he calls the establishment cabal run. And a cabal, of course, is a group of occultists. And he says that they are scared of Donald Trump because he's uncontrollable. He doesn't belong to the secret society. And you see, they want to have someone in that powerful office who will be a puppet to them, who wants the money. Donald Trump has his own money. He doesn't need their money. And by all accounts, he seems to actually love the country, and he wants to save the country from ruin. A lot of people recognize that. So he's been far ahead in the polls. So while the people, many people, have been voting for Donald Trump so that he could become the nominee, the establishment is making plans to try and rob that from him. Now, Paul Ryan, who is the Speaker of the House today, has been put forward as a man that the establishment will put out there. Someone who's had no votes, no people voting for him, an establishment candidate that the establishment will put forward at the upcoming convention. Now, do I know if that will happen or not? No, of course I don't. But I can tell you this, something will happen to stop Donald Trump. If they can, they'll stop him before the convention. If they can't stop him before the convention, they'll stop him at the convention. If they can't stop him at the convention, then they will try to turn him around. If they can't turn him to their side, then he's very likely to have an unfortunate accident. But they're not going to put up with that. But let's just talk about this stealing the convention and stealing the delegates from Donald Trump. Well, this was on Drudge. Ryan waits for Armageddon. Why would it be called Armageddon? Because so many voters have voted for Donald Trump in the primaries, many of them first-time voters, many of them even crossing party lines, that if he gets robbed of the nomination, there will be revolt against the system. It will be something open before everyone where they can see that the elites will not allow any other agenda but their own. And I think that's a good thing in some ways, because finally many people who have not understood that the system is totally controlled by the elite will finally see that and understand that and have to come to grips with that fact. But it will also polarize the country even more than it is already, and it could even turn to violence. I think really it's certain that there's going to be turmoil over this. Now, I'm talking about what's happening in America. I believe that this is being paralleled and will be paralleled in other nations around the world. Trump really is but one example of resistance springing up. There will be a lot of anger, a lot of disillusionment, and he and others like him are overturned by the elite. People aren't going to like that. People who are banking on that change are going to be disappointed. So what do we see for the future? What does this turning point really tell us? Well, there is a growing struggle against the elite and their policies by many ordinary people who don't want to go in that direction, and therefore who are willing to sign on to any movement where they hope they can defeat the elite. So here are 7 points, 7 turning points from 2015. And the thing that all of this chaos has in common is it's all related to the globalist agenda. There are some who have been fighting against the globalist mindset who say we're winning. They look at all this turmoil that's coming up as a result of Donald Trump's situation right now. I'm sure that this is happening in other parts of the world in other ways. And they're thinking more and more people are going to become aware of this, and we'll get together and we'll defeat these globalists. So they think we're winning. And you know what? That's very tempting to want to get on board and help them. You know, if you really hate what the globalists are about, it's very tempting to want to get on board one of these movements and to help them. But is this true? Is it possible to actually win against the elite at this point? I think you're dealing with something like the Titanic. We've already hit the iceberg. Once that happened with the Titanic, there was no changing what was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. And that water was going to get into the hold of the ship. And it was all compartmentalized. And the way it happened, it went from compartment to compartment to compartment until finally the ship was sunk. It took some time for that to happen, but it was inevitable that was going to happen. Once it hit the iceberg, it was a sure thing as to what was going to happen with the Titanic. Well, the world is the same as the Titanic in this picture. The world system. In Revelation, it gives us a roadmap of the things that are to happen in the final generation that will take us to the one world government and then to the final end of this world. Yeshua Messiah gave us that revelation. And he said, this is the revelation of Yeshua the Messiah, which God gave him to show his servants the things which must happen. Now, seeing that the world has already hit the iceberg, seeing that these things must happen, we have a few choices that we can choose as to how we're going to deal with the situation and the increasing turmoil that's coming into the world through this globalist agenda. Let's ask a few questions. Should you argue with the captain in this situation? The captain being the globalists. Is it going to help you to fight with them in view of the fact that we know the ship is going to sink? Or perhaps you're not a fighter. Should you just fiddle around? Fiddle away your time while the ship is sinking. Is that going to help you? Because the ship is sinking. Or should you get serious about a lifeboat before the big panic happens? Because believe me, when all the people realize what's happening, there will be a big panic. And they won't all be nice. And it's not going to be pretty as to what happens. The thing to do is to be on your lifeboat before that happens, isn't it? The only lifeboat on the horizon is the remnant Exodus. That's what the scriptures show us.